Hi guys, my name is Maria Laura. I make functional ceramics for interior design and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this channel I talk about my life as an artist, business, clay, glazes, vases and everything in between. This video is part of my series of glaze test reviews. I test glazes really frequently out of scientific curiosity as well as in search for the glazes that I personally like. For example, yesterday I took out maybe 30 or 40 glaze test tiles out of my kiln, and today I wanted to make a quick review video of those tests. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about very fun marshmallow or puff glazes that are based on silicon carbide and zinc. The interesting part about those glazes is that they puff up a lot, creating this beautiful surface. Here's another example of a glaze like this. So it kind of crumbled and puffed up quite a bit. If we look at the smaller test tiles, this is one of the other examples of a glaze like this. If you look through Glazes.com and search for puffy glaze or marshmallow glaze, you'll find a lot of recipes. Some of them are by Matt Katz and a lot of other recipes as well. However, I'm not only talking about those glazes, I'm also researching those glazes and I'm looking at how exactly different variations, different proportions of various ingredients affect how the glaze looks like. I performed several tests, several rounds of tests with different fluxes and different flux ratios while keeping silica and alumina the same, and let's see what happened. Just to note what those things are, R2O to RO flux ratio shows the ratio of R2O flux to RO flux. R2O fluxes are alkali metal fluxes that include sodium, potassium, lithium, and RO fluxes include magnesium, barium, calcium, zinc, and strontium. R2O fluxes are faster melting, they're more powerful fluxes, and they are needed to create a glaze, versus RO fluxes refer to the alkaline earth fluxes located in a second column of a periodic table. There's one RO flux that's not here, but instead it's located in a transition metal group, and it's zinc. Despite the fact that it's there, it's still a very powerful RO flux, which is the basis of the puff glaze. And a quick note, how exactly do you find the R2O RO flux ratio? If you go to glazes.org, you open the calculator and you check those little different numbers right below the calculator. You're gonna see the R2O to RO flux ratio right there. This is where you can check what flux ratio you have. So what I did, I took the same recipe and I adjusted the flux ratios. I kept everything else the same. I have the same amount of titanium dioxide. This is really good for glazes, especially lava glazes and textured glazes, because it makes the glaze a little bit stiffer and it also promotes the silicon carbide action. Also, I use the same amount of silicon carbide. This is a man-made material that is the basis of all the lava glazes, and it works by releasing carbon dioxide gas and creating little bubbles. If you look at a glaze like this, there are little bubbles that are created, and let's take a look. Let's take a closer look. As you can see, there's a whole layer of bubbles right there inside this glaze. This is silicon carbide releasing carbon dioxide gas during the melting process. Zinc has a melting point of 1970 degrees, but it begins to melt a lot faster in conjunction with other things like Nepheline Syenite, for example, and inside the glaze with silica and alumina in it. And it's also known for the use in crawl glazes. Nepheline Syenite is the R2O flux that I used here. It's a feldspathoid, so it's kind of like a feldspar, which is a really good source of sodium, some potassium, but it also has a relatively high silica and alumina. And for that reason, I didn't really add a lot of silica and a lot of clay into my glaze because I already had a lot of it from Nepheline Syenite. I got two test rows going. Both of them are kind of the expansion of R2O to RO flux ratios while keeping silica and alumina the same. The first row is a little bit higher on the map, basically higher and diagonally up, and the second row is a little bit lower on the UMF, lower down on silica and lower down on alumina as well. In the first row we have 0 to 1, 0.1 to 0.9, 0.2 to 0.8, 0.3 to 0.7, 0.4 to 0.6, 0.5 to 0.5, and 0.6 to 0.4 R2O to RO flux ratios. And then in the second example, in the second row of test styles, we have 0.1 to 0.9, 0.2 to 0.8, 0.3 to 0.7, 0.4 to 0.6, 0.5 to 0.5, and 0.6 to 0.4 flux ratios. As you can see, there are some really interesting results. So first of all, the more R2O we added, the more reaction we got. And this is easily explainable because feldspars and Nepheline Syenite in particular is a flux that facilitates melting because it's a more powerful flux. The more R2O or Nepheline Syenite I put, the more the reaction occurred. And in our case, reaction means both melting and also releasing carbon dioxide gas from silicon carbide. So you see, as I go to the right, I have puffier and puffier and puffier glaze, versus if I go more to the left, the glaze is less puffy, and sometimes silicon carbide didn't even react at all, and the glaze is also wider. So if we start at 0 to 1 or 0.1 to 0.9 flux ratio, RO fluxes on their own are not enough to melt the glaze, and as you can see, the top left test style, which is 0 to 1, isn't melted at all, which is why it's cracked. The surface tension was really high, so it fell off the test style just because there was literally almost zero melting, because the melting temperature of this combination of ingredients should have been a lot higher than it was on the specific test style. As we keep going, as we move towards 0.3 to 0.7 and then 0.4 to 0.6, the more reaction there is, the puffier the glaze there is. As you know, the ideal range for cone 6 and just mid to high temperature glazes, the ideal flux ratio for durability is 0.2 to 0.8, 0.3 to 0.7, maybe a little bit higher, but somewhere within those ranges. And as we can see here, although all of those glazes are under fire, because lava by default is under fire, and the puff glaze is also under fired. Although all of them are under fired, we still get the most durable, the hardest glazes that are in the middle of the row. As we keep going to 0.4 and 2.6 ratios and higher, the alkali portion of the glaze is now higher, and as a result there is more bubbles, more silicon carbide released, the puffier the glaze is. So a brief moral of this story is that if you want to get a very puffy glaze, just add more Nepheline Syenite, add more R2O flux so that the reaction actually goes. Although there is a point, depending on the cone, I fired it to cone 6 oxidation, but if you are firing it to higher temperature, it's possible that this point of melting is going to happen a little bit lower, and as a result your glaze might actually melt too much and the puffiness is going to go away and the glaze is going to become melty. So just to avoid that, don't add too much if you're firing higher, but again, the testing is always important, so test and check which R2O to RO flux ratio works the best for you. And then another quick range of tests that I performed is a color test. I just wanted to see how well zinc takes the colorants, and it's actually taking the colorants basically in exactly the same way as my magnesium test styles did and all the other ones. Of course, barium was a little bit brighter, but zinc took on the color quite well. I had a lot of titanium dioxide here in all of the test styles, so whatever colorants I added, that's on top of 10% titanium dioxide, so it might have affected it quite a bit. So what's happening here? The first row is chrome with a combination of all the different colorants. So chrome, for example, the second test style is chrome plus copper, the third test style is chrome plus manganese, then chrome plus iron, chrome plus nickel, chrome plus Ultrox. Ultrox is a substitute for Zircopax that I didn't have when I was buying it, so Ultrox is kind of like an opacifier that makes a white color. And so row by row I was just mixing specific colorant with specific colorants, and basically there's nothing that surprising. I think what I liked is how clearly iron was brown, no matter with which metallic oxide I mixed it with. And then also how Ultrox overruled, but didn't overrule the silicon carbide enough and stayed gray. Although the rest actually changed the color, I believe that silicon carbide is powerful enough. It's very gray and dark, and I added quite a bit of it, so it was actually visible on my textiles here. But even though it was so gray, when I added the metallic oxides, they actually reacted quite well. And I got the whole range of green and brown and orange colors. So I thought it was quite fun, and I thought it was a really good example of how with the same base glaze, but with different metallic oxides, the glaze acquired completely different characteristics. One example that I wanted to show you is textile number 5 versus textile number 18. Let's take a closer look at them and let's see how exactly the same glaze creates completely different textures depending on the colorant oxide that we add to it. So as you can see, the green glaze right here, this is nickel plus chrome versus the brown glaze is iron plus ultrox. And the difference is not only in color, which makes sense, but also in the texture of the glaze. Like this one looks like a puffy marshmallow glaze with like some crumbly texture, versus this is more of a crawl even, I would say. One more interesting thing that I wanted to add is that if we look at both rows of textiles, we will see that the lower flux ratio means less melting, and that means much higher surface tension because I added quite a bit of alumina, quite a bit of titanium, and titanium sometimes acts like alumina. Therefore, I got a crawl glaze. And that crawl glaze is not because of zinc. It was because of the very low amount of R2O flux in it, which made the RO flux less effective, which means the alumina and titanium overruled and just like crumbled the glaze together and created those huge cracks. But all in all, I felt like that was a really good example showing how a very easy glaze that only has alumina, silica, zinc, Nepheline Syenite for the R2O flux, titanium dioxide and silicon carbide creates this huge, amazing and beautiful range of glazes. If you ever want to learn more, you can join my course on textures and on glazes, or just ask me questions. But yeah, thanks for watching. I felt like that was a really nice example of textiles. I'm hoping to continue and just to show you things around. If you ever notice something really interesting that I missed that explains some of the questions that you had earlier, let me know and I would be happy to hear your thoughts and your ideas and maybe test something else. I have a lot of textiles going on. Hopefully I'll see you soon in the next video, whether it's a glaze review or something else. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to like the video, subscribe, follow, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.